Hi, IBD. I'm Meredith Heyman. This is Industry Insights. Thanks so much for joining me. The China biotech industry is booming. Competition is steep for U.S. and European counterparts, and it's unclear whether China's growing prowess in pharmaceuticals is just what the doctor ordered for industry innovation or a new pain point for domestic drug makers. Joining me to discuss what investors need to know is Josh Smiley, Chief Operating Officer of Zai Lab. The biotech company has headquarters in China and the US. All right, let's get right into it. So, the China biotech industry has gone from one where the focus has been generic drugs and fast follower copycats. Now we're seeing field trailblazers. How has this course changed?
I think three things. I think the first is we're in I think the third generation of biotech companies in China, and there has been an evolution in terms of what these companies focus on. We're really now seeing depth of scientific innovation in oncology and immunology. We see now scientists who are coming directly from training into China biotech companies. So the proliferation of PhD talent that's resident in China now is I think significantly more than what we saw even 5 years ago, where a talented researcher would go to the U.S. first and work for a multinational before coming back. Secondly, I think the focus on areas in China that benefit from rapid cycle times, from novel combinations of known biology and known platforms is really where we're seeing benefits. So platforms like ADCs, bispecifics, T-cell engagers, and CAR T are areas where China is really moving fast to catch up, and in some cases even sort of break ahead of what we're seeing in the West.
Big pharma is responding. We're seeing companies like Eli Lilly, Pfizer, AstraZeneca spending billions to either license or just outright buy assets from China. Why?
I think a couple things. First, I think the areas that these companies are focused on, they're looking at targets that we know work. They're finding ways to address or attack those targets in different ways, and they're able to generate clinical data pretty quickly. So the big pharma companies very highly value clinical data. In China, there are so many patients that access clinical trials in areas like oncology that these companies can generate phase one data quickly and compellingly that make the big pharmas interested in buying those assets.
And Josh, to that, why are international partnerships for the biotech industry in China so important for the nation?
So I think first, as we mentioned, the biotech companies are emerging in China with good innovation, but they don't have the access to capital to take that early stage innovation where they can make an investment of 5 to 10 to $15 million to generate some clinical data. To move from early clinical data to global trials and registration requires hundreds of millions of dollars. These companies don't yet have access to that kind of capital, so they need partnerships. But I think from a China perspective, if you look at the number of PhDs that are coming out of high class institutions in China, being able to capture that opportunity and keep it in China as opposed to moving around the world for training and otherwise, I think is a national priority. And the Chinese government has been very explicit in nurturing and putting in place programs and policies to grow the innovation capability in China. But again, I think it still requires Western expertise and partnerships to get these drugs across the finish line on a global basis.
So, what would you say China's biotech industry's main goal is? Is it to move more to cutting edge medicines and really first class approaches?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that from a China perspective, they would love to see the next Pfizer's or Lilly's or argenx, sort of come out of Shanghai or Beijing or Guangzhou or one of the areas. I mean, I think there's no doubt there. There's a focus in the 5-year plans and otherwise around medical innovation and biotech. So that's a focus, but I think that takes a long time to develop. So I think in the near term, the focus is on ensuring that there's a conducive set of policies that allow biotech innovation to happen in China, move quickly to get high quality early phase research done, and then I think over time the goal will be to try to keep some of that value in China as opposed to it being exported through Merck or Pfizer or a company like that. But I think in the near term, it's established some scientific leadership and continue to partner on a global basis.
And going back just a little bit, December 2025 saw President Trump's Biosecure Act. Does this pose any challenges to potential China biotech partnerships?
I think the Biosecure Act, as passed now, is pretty narrow and pretty narrowly focused. So I think the vast majority of the scientific innovation and partnerships and other things that are happening cross border, so between China and the U.S., I think those are unaffected by the Biosecure Act. There are some particular areas that both sides will be careful about. But if you're working like Zai on oncology drugs, immunology drugs. These are benefits for patients around the world. This isn't a zero sum game for U.S. versus China or otherwise. So I would say 95% of the work that's happening will be unaffected by anything that's in Biosecure.
And that work, drug development is
Yeah.
really a huge focus. There's more flexible regulations and government funding in China. How does that place China as a particularly agile rival for Western countries and their biotech industries?
Yeah, there are some inherent advantages in doing early phase development in China. The first is access to patients. I think if you look at the opportunities to test new drugs, quickly, the ability to enroll patients in China is two, three, 4x what we see in the U.S. And it's just because there's a lot of patients and there is a set of policies that make it easy to start clinical trials. I think there's a lot to learn in the U.S. From this. It's hospital review boards. It's how quickly you can approve INDs to get phase one program started. China has done a really good job there, and again, taking advantage of the natural benefit of having a lot of patients. Unfortunately, with oncology or immunology diseases, so those things put China at the forefront. I think in certain areas of being able to develop drugs quickly.
Mhm. And how would you say the area kind of compares to that of, when it comes to new drug development, Western countries? How are the 2
Yeah.
industries different, especially or beyond that of just patient accessibility?
So I think that a couple of things. I think first, the truly novel biology, breakthrough targets, probably still there's an advantage in the U.S. and in the West. That may change over time, but I think the biggest differences in China is that you can enroll patients a lot faster. You can test new ideas and new modalities, and that's why I think these ADCs and bispecifics and other things are really benefiting from China because it's rapid iteration, right? You can combine two molecules, see how they work. If they don't work, you can move on to the next. So I think that is really an advantage in China today. They can move faster, but I think that the sort of, as I say, sort of breakthrough innovations, the out of the box, sort of creativity to address a disease. I think there's still a benefit in the U.S. and in Europe, for that kind of approach. But over time, I think again, what I would say is this isn't a zero sum game. Anything that happens in China that increases the number of medicines or the power of medicines that are available to treat these kind of diseases is good for everybody. So I think from that standpoint, it's exciting to be at a company like Zai where we get to see innovation happen in the West and in China and see how together those kind of innovations can help improve the outcome or outlook for patients with serious disease.
Mhm. And in China, the biotech industry, drug development, it's been described as cutthroat competition there.
Yeah.
Who are the leaders in China in the biotech industry?
Well, I was certainly I'm biased. I think Zai Lab is certainly one. We've been around for 11 years, so we're we've lived through a couple of these cycles, and we have some really exciting medicines, on the way and in clinical development. I think if you look at some of the other local players, Ray is one of the biggest companies. I think a very robust early stage portfolio. Companies like Innovent have been around also for quite some time and are developing some really interesting medicines. Then there's a whole, as I mentioned earlier, a whole wave of newer companies, companies like a partner. We have Metalink that is got a great ADC platform. We've partnered on multiple occasions with them, as have many of the big multinational players. But as you mentioned, I think if you look at a particular target there is cutthroat competition. There's probably 4 or 5 or more companies going after that target, and it's kind of a race to see who can generate data first and fastest. So it's in this case, I think competition helps patients because we're going to get to new, better drugs faster.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the focus for the biotech industry in China um, before being oncology, immunology, also neuroscience. Why are these the areas that are being tapped into most?
I think, starting with oncology, it's just there are so many patients in China who are looking to access new therapies and clinical trials. So I think an obvious area for development. We're starting to see that in immunology. I think also, though, the idea that there are known targets, so known biological targets to go after, and really by going after them with new modalities and new combinations, that again that part of iteration and sort of rapid cycle times really benefits oncology and immunology. I think some of the newer areas that either require much longer studies or new targets and otherwise, those are probably still going to start in the West and then migrate to China over time.
And what do Western companies need to do to really step up their game and continue to compete with the China biotech industry?
I think speed is the thing. So I think there's a piece that an individual company can't necessarily do. I think in the U.S. we should be looking to find ways to speed up hospital review processes, IND processes. I think the FDA has come out and talked about this even as recently as this week. So I think that piece can be addressed at a more macro level. Individual companies, though, I think it's speed. Having been involved in venture capital and seeing biotech in the US, many of the companies are built not to get to a quick result. They're built to develop a drug or a platform over multiple years and then eventually get acquired by a bigger multinational. What we're seeing in China is it's much more 18-month, 24-month focus. Find a good target, work fast, work hard to get to some data, and then out license. So I think this is a wake up call for biotechs, in the US and in the West to work faster, to work on get critical data as quickly as possible, and move with agility.
Hmm. And finally, Josh, for investors, could China biotech stocks present both an opportunity and a challenge for U.S. biotech stocks and companies?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think as you look now, again, many of the biotech companies that are competing against these China, may have competing programs. Again, it's not zero sum, but on an individual company basis, there will be challenges. I think many of those companies are probably still private, but I think from a public market perspective for investors, yeah, I think you want to look and say, hey, if there's a company that in the U.S. that's got a phase 1 or phase 2 program, you probably want to look and say what's coming behind there, or is there a chance for a China company to overtake them? So I think just keeping up with what's going on in China is important. But I think it also presents an opportunity for investors, both in terms of being able to look at companies like Zai. We're traded on both Nasdaq and in Hong Kong, so you have easy opportunities to access companies like Zai. But also, I mean, as you mentioned, you're seeing lots of bigger companies able to acquire innovation from Chinese companies, so they are supplementing and enhancing their pipeline. So I think for an investor to be aware of the scientific opportunities in China, you can play that many ways. You can play it by investing directly in companies like Zai. You can play it by looking at some of the bigger pharmas who are exploiting the opportunities in China, and you can also be defensive and look at your biotech companies and say, hey, is there a chance that they're going to be, facing more and more intense competition over time? So I think those are the kind of 3 ways to think about it.
Absolutely. All right, Josh.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be watching. Thanks so much for joining me. This is Industry Insights. I'm Meredith Heyman. Stay right here on IBD for more. We'll see you next time.